Well, welcome to the second unit. Hopefully you've learned how things go in the class. That first one's always a steep learning curve, but let's get started. One of the ways of trying to figure out how things can go wrong, especially in design phase, is this thing called failure modes and effects analysis. There's a long history of that. And instead of going over this slide and just giving a brief overview, what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you a PowerPoint when I teach the FEMA and let you guys see what it looks like. There'll be a lot more detail. If you have any questions, go ahead and ask on the discussion. I'll be glad to come on with a whiteboard and talk a bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the Six Sigma process. The first phase is, of course, is define. And what you want to do is scope and boundary. You want it to be very significant, but you want it so significant that you can't tackle it. It's like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. You got to define what a defect is. And the best way to do that is probably ask the customer what would be defective and then work backwards from that. A team charter and a champion. A charter is simply a contract between the Six Sigma team and the management. And the champion, he actually works for the team. He's actually above you, but he's the one that runs interference for you and can let things happen. He clears the roadblocks. Again, you want to estimate the project impact. Why is this important? And you want to get leadership involved in this. If the leaders aren't involved in supporting it, it'll never happen. You'll find the biggest resistance should be about middle management. They'll resist change the most traditionally. It's because they have the most to use. They came up through the system, and they depend on that system for their very job. And some of the main activities during the define phase, you validate and identify opportunities, and we'll talk about stakeholders a little bit. Pick out who's on the team, get this charter done, look at the process, map it out for you, and you want to get the low-hanging fruit, and you set up the rules, and you're looking for the results. Again, you've heard this expression, f of x equal to y. Define what the results are, what you want to happen. Oh my, teams. This is actually a semester-long course when I teach it here at the college. There's a lot going on here. And I'm not going to spend much time on this slide. I can't go into it enough to talk. But go on YouTube and search up teams. But what I'd be more interested in is if you could find out why, more of the whys. Go to Quinn Studer. He's got some great ideas. Cotter's a good one, John Cotter. But do some research on your own. Also, I handed out that Introduction to Lean. That's a pretty good introduction to teams, especially the chicken experiment and also the NBA example. This is some different types of teams. And again, go research them. I mean, there's all kinds of teams, and what you call them, it's not too much worried about that. What I'm going to do is down to this last bullet here, natural work team organization. The natural, we're hardwired to work in about family size groups, 5 to 9 people. Right. So if you go back to your work, look at this. I mean, if you have some control over it, you want to get about 5 to 9 people in each one of the teams, and you might as well organize them that way. If you don't, they're going to do it themselves anyway. Or even worse, they might do something less than 5 people, and then you get what's called groupthink. These are people that basically they support each other. They start thinking the same. They basically got one entity there, and they don't work as a diverse teams. You need 5 to 7. 9, about 7 or so. Again, natural work team organizations. If you can organize them into groups of 5 to 9, no matter how many you're supervising, you've got an effective team. If you don't do that, they're going to do it anyway. 2 types of customers. There's the external customer. That's the one that's paying you money. All right, they receive the product or whatever it is you're given. Internal customer, that's the next guy down the line. Again, the customer's important. They're the ones that ultimately tell you what has value, what doesn't have value, and by default, they also imply what is muda. So customers are vital in a Six Sigma and Lean environment. Customers are ultimately what define our whole process and how well it's running. Process management, again, when you're talking about Six Sigma, what you're doing is you're focused on the project or on the process, not on the final product or service or whatever. And Duran, and that's why Duran's definition is where you organize all your resources and you produce the required end result. And he says there are 3 dimensions we got to work on: effectiveness and efficiency. Pretty self-explanatory. The other thing is adaptability. This is where Six Sigma, and we had that first reading. I said, what do you think of this article? The guy says Six Sigma destroys innovation. No. Six Sigma encourages innovation. I want you to think outside the box. And again, if you have diverse teams, they can bring that diversity in and they can think outside the box. This is the big overall picture of a process. It's called SIPOC, Supplier Inputs, Process, Outputs, and Customers. And just look over the slide. It should be self-explanatory. And what is a stakeholder? Stakeholder is basically anybody that has a vested interest in that organization or company, right? And if you look at Taguchi's loss function, ultimately we're all stakeholders in every company, every organization, because its impact on society. See if this doesn't make sense. Do all these people have a vested interest in that organization's success or failure? Ultimately, success or failure will be decided by the customer. Again, external customers are most important because they actually give you the money. They keep you in business. But internal customers are important too. They're usually employees. The biggest problem in every organization, biggest by far, is communication. And if I had a magic bullet for that or a silver bullet for that, man, I wouldn't have to work again. I'd just make money telling people how to communicate. I'm just going to use the example of a farmer for external customers. The end user is ultimately the farmer. He purchases the product for his own use. But intermediately, you got the dealer and mechanics and other people that help support that tractor. And impacted parties, those of us that eat the food that the farmer grows, we'd be impacted parties. So if that tractor fails, well, we might not get all the soybeans we want that year. Customer data, what does the customer want, right? And I'm just going to not talk directly to this slide. I'm just going to talk about how not to do it. The company, one of the companies I worked for just for a few years was Vickers, because they went out of business. But they were trying to decide on what features they have on their hydraulic valves. And they sat there and they decided that they needed electronics. They had these big committees and stuff. The one person missing on that was the customer. So it came time for selling it. Said, hey, look at this new valve we got. The customer says, well, that's nice. How much is it going to cost me? And they weren't willing to pay for it. It didn't have the value. They've been doing studies for 50 years on what customers want. Same 3 things: price, quality, and service. That's what they want, right? The customer tells you what to make or what they want and how much value it is. So you got to collect the data on the customer and get that information. And these are some different ways of doing that. I like Six Sigma projects that analyze customer data. I did a lot of this with emergency rooms and things with some healthcare facilities. And we'll talk later on about statistical tests and all these other things. And then you can also look them up at the asq.org website. Our YouTube's got some videos on this. Well, you got all that information, and here's what you got to do. Then you got to translate that into what the requirements are. You know, one of the things I liked when we were designing valves for John Deere is you get a list of specs that they wanted. And it'd be, oh my goodness, 3-ring binder full of specs. But it told us exactly what we wanted. Oh, it's got to withstand high pressure. It's got to withstand 4,000. They told you exactly what you had to meet. But anyway, you got to determine critical requirements, especially if you're in healthcare or retail or something like that. They're not going to tell you directly. So you got to do the massaging of the data and figure it out. Again, customer priorities: price, quality, service. People will tend to buy the cheap one first, and they'll only abandon that cheap one if the quality and service don't follow up with that. If you lack any of those other 3, say you're missing quality and service, well, guess what? You got to come down on the price. right? This is called a quality function deployment. And I'm just going to give a quick overview, but basically what you do is you get your customers' wants and desires, and you correlate that to your competencies, and you come up and how do you compare to your competition, and you come up with how good are you, right? There's actually a QFD institution. I don't see this used a whole lot anymore, but at one time they were very popular, and they're still a very good way to do it. Team dynamics, again, you want about 5 to 9 because that's the natural work group. You want all the diversity you can get. The more diversity you have, the better you have at different geographic areas, different cultures, whatever you can, get that diversity in there. 4 stages: forming, storming, norming, and performing. Some people add some like adjourning and other stages, but these are the big 4. And life cycle, there's a time for a team just to naturally just go away. You've seen those teams that just hang on forever without any purpose or anything. And recognition and reward, huge. When I was in the military, it's amazing what guys would do just to get a medal on their chest. Just amazing. And you want to reward, you want to give an attaboy, attagirl. Ratio's about 3 to 1. You say, okay, attaboy 3 times for every, you got to do this better. And when we say you got to do this thing better, 2 minutes. Do not scold anybody for longer than 2 minutes, because then you're not correcting, you're nagging. There's actually a science that says that 2 minutes is the limit. Different roles, and they should be self-explanatory here. As a green belt, if you need some help with some things, just ask. I'll be glad to step in. Or if you got a black belt on your staff, just ask him or her. And the rest are pretty self-explanatory. Team tools. Again, these are. I think we've all had teaming workshops. And I teach the semester-long class. Again, groupthink. If you get more than 5 people in a group, you're pretty good. There's a bunch of problem areas. I'll just let you research those yourself. And I've got some things in the reading. And also, if you look at the handout I gave you, that lean overview, that's got this in it. Again, the number 1 problem in any organization, communication. And I'm just going to hit on a couple of these things. Information is power, and people will use that. You ever seen those people that know something but they won't tell you? Or they pretend like they got a big secret or something like that, right? If you find somebody like that, go around them. Do not try to fool around with them, because they're trying to control power, and they recognize information is power. But you want communication, open communication in all directions. No gatekeepers. Just communicate. Open, transparency.